a Canadian radio sanctuary podcast.
Our guest is Father Basil of Westminster Abbey, and tell us a bit of the history. When was this abbey first formed?
Well, the abbey came into being in 1939 from the Abbey of Mount Angel in Oregon. But I should qualify first that there are two institutions here. There's Westminster Abbey and the Seminary of Christ the King. They are not the same. And I stress that because people often get them mixed up and call one the other and vice versa. So what happened was that in 1931, Archbishop Duke of Vancouver had started a seminary called the Seminary of Christ the King for training young men to be priests for the Archdiocese of Vancouver, that is to say diocesan priests who would minister to people. And he staffed that with about 5 of his diocesan clergy to teach, and he had founded that at Ladner. I can't think of the name of the house, it's on the tip of my tongue, an old converted mansion. And he found that it was very difficult to make that go because here were these priests having to go down there and teach. They were also running parishes and ministering to people. They just couldn't do it. So Archbishop Duke looked around for a religious community that he could bring who would take over the running of the seminary, would form the faculty. And he decided he would like to have Benedictine monks do this. So he began to negotiate with the Abbey of Mount Angel in Oregon, Abbot Thomas Meyer, and so they agreed that in 1939 they would send 5 Benedictine monks up to BC to take over the seminary at Ladner. Now, so far, what that sounds like is that they will send a faculty to take over the seminary, but it was made clear in the negotiations with Archbishop Duke that that also involved the establishing of a Benedictine monastery here, which would be separate from the seminary, but whose members would teach in the seminary. Okay, so in September 14, 1939, 5 Benedictine monks came from Mount Angel, Oregon, all of whom are deceased now. The most recently deceased was Father Eugene Medved, who died in 1992. He eventually became the abbot of our monastery. At that time, he came as rector or director or principal of the seminary. So these 5 men came to Ladner and took up the teaching of seminarians for the priesthood. In about a year's time, I think it was about 1940, they wanted to get some other accommodation that was not suitable for certain reasons that I'm not familiar with. They acquired a house on Deer Lake, or on the shores of Deer Lake in Burnaby. It was called the Seeperley Mansion, a large, substantial country home of the early 1900s, a very substantial, or what you call it, I guess, upper class country house. And they acquired that and another smaller or similar mansion a little distance away from that. And into that Seeperley house, the first 5 monks moved in 1940, I think it was. And the seminary was moved up to the other house just below that. And so they transferred their operations to the seminary in 1940. And the rest, as they say, is history. The monastic community increased in size and the seminary increased in size. And it was in the early 1940s that the Benedictine fathers began to look for a more permanent location where they could build a substantial monastery and seminary building and continue on their work. And they looked at the North Shore, they looked at the university area, they looked at the Point Roberts, Boundary Bay area, and is this okay so far? Okay. And in 1941, I think it was, or 42, 5 of them took a drive out to the Fraser Valley area, and they came to Mission, which, by the way, had been named because of the Oblate Fathers' work with the Indian people here in 1860. And they had St. Mary's Mission School here, and after which the little town of Mission took its name. Anyway, the 5, or whatever they were, 4, came in a car, and they drove out to Mission, and they started to come along the Lougheed Highway just past Mission. And one of the fathers looked up on his left at a high hill, just off of the area where they were driving, and he said casually, "I wonder if there would be something up there." So they turned around and found their way, apparently it was in November of 1940, I think, or 41, a very, very rainy, drizzly day, clouded and so forth. And they finally found a back road, which is just over here on Parr Road. They found a back road into this place, and they drove in and parked and saw a kind of a crest of a hill on their left and walked up. That's the hill just up behind us here. And out before them unfolded this magnificent view. And so they knelt on the spot, said the Our Father, and buried a little medal of St. Benedict in that spot as a kind of token and a kind of not a magic charm, but a reminder of the place and to invoke St. Benedict's prayers. And then after that, they began to inquire about the property and who owned it. Subsequently, they acquired it. They farmed it. Even from that time on, from the 40s on, they farmed the area around here. They had a small farmhouse here. And then in 1953, they began, I could say we because I came into the picture then, we began to dig for the foundations of the buildings. And we began the construction in 1953, and in 1954 at Christmas time, we moved here from Deer Lake, and we had the first Mass here at Midnight Mass of Christmas 1954, and again the rest is history. We have gradually developed the buildings, the landscape, and the work has gone on since then. So that, if that answers your question, is how the monastery and the seminary, there are two different things, Westminster Abbey being the Benedictine Abbey, and the Seminary of Christ the King being the seminary for the Archdiocese of Vancouver, officially, and also for any other students who may wish to study here. So we have students from all over Canada. So that's where we are at the present time.
Touching on just the seminary, first of all, how many students would there be nowadays?
We have about, I think, I would roughly say around 50. We have about 20 in the minor seminary. That it comprises high school years. And then there are about 30 in what is called arts or philosophy, as we call it, university years, the 4 years of arts, college work, and then 4 years of theology. And there are about 30 students between philosophy and theology, or arts and theology. So we have about 50 all told, give or take.
And how many monks are instructors?
There are about 30 of us in the monastery at the present.
So would every monk that's here be an instructor as well, or not everyone?
No. In the monastery, we comprise two different groups, although we're one monastic family. We have those of the monastery who are ordained as priests, and most of the priests, not all, most of the priests are involved in teaching in the seminary, either at high school or college or theology level. Those who do not become priests are called brothers, and they are involved with the trades and crafts of the monastery, although in our monastery, I think 2 or 3 of the brothers teach in the seminary as well. Brother Meinrad is actually he is vice rector or assistant rector of the minor seminary, and Brother Luke also teaches in the seminary, and Brother Peter also sometimes teaches in the seminary. So not all the priests teach in the monastery, and 2 or 3 of the brothers also teach, so it's not quite cut and dried. I wouldn't say the priests teach, the brothers don't teach. It's not quite that simple.
Now, what is your involvement nowadays, and has it changed over the years?
Well, there's two things. My involvement is with the monastery and with the seminary. And my involvement in the monastery is that of, just being a Benedictine monk, and in itself that is kind of a full-time thing, living the life of prayer and work. I am the assistant choir master and organist of the monastery, and am involved with various areas of plain song for the community, for our community prayer. And I also have 2 or 3 subjects that I teach in the minor seminary as well, so that I am involved on the faculty of the minor seminary, not the major seminary.
Now, on the Abbey, is there not a story behind the bell tower and the construction of all that?
Yes. One of our priests, Father Bede Reynolds, born in 1891, had been a oil man, a prosperous, I guess you'd say, active man in the oil business in the United States in the early decades of the last century, or mid part of the last century, up to the 1940s. He married in I think, late 20s or so, and his wife, Patricia Pfitzer, that's P-F-I-T-Z-E-R, Patricia Pfitzer is a mouthful, was Catholic. Kenyon Reynolds at the time was not. Through her good example, he was attracted to Catholicism and entered Catholicism in 1933. Subsequently to that, over toward the 1940s, she developed cancer of the throat, and she died in 1945. Kenyon Reynolds decided he wished to enter the religious life. He was acquainted with Mount Angel Abbey, Oregon, and their foundation in B.C., and applied to enter the monastery in B.C., which he did in the same year, 1945, and was ordained a priest in 1951 and served in many capacities, teaching at the seminary, also a lot of the work on the water lines, the engineering areas of our foundation here. So it was decided that we had a set of bells. We had acquired them in 1951, and they were English bells, which are changed from this particular style of ringing bells. And the family of Father Bede's wife, the Pfitzer family, offered to donate or to provide for the erecting of a bell tower to house the bells. And that was done in 1957. And also, Patricia Pfitzer's body was brought here from California and reinterred in a chapel which was built underneath the bell tower. And that chapel was to serve as a burial plot for the members of the Pfitzer family. As it has turned out, that has not happened. Mrs. Pfitzer is buried there. Father Bede, who died in 1989 at the age of 97, is buried on our own monastic cemetery here. So Patty, as she was called, Patricia Pfitzer, is buried in the crypt, but no one else will be buried there. The chapel is still there intact, but that's the way that has turned out.
Well, what about the bell tower itself?
Well, it was designed to accommodate the bells which are chain rung. That is to say, each bell is rung a 360-degree arc. And that, from an engineering point of view, puts quite a stress on the structure of a building. Most of the bell towers in England, where this type of ringing is practiced, are, of course, of stone. And so it was quite an engineering challenge to design one of concrete that would accommodate the thrust of these bells. And that was done by Mr. Gatte, our architect, and also Per Christofferson, who was his engineer in that. And so it's one of the few concrete bell towers. I think there's one or two more now. Bell towers in the world for the ringing, for English change ringing. And we have a ring of 10 bells, and they are rung in chain ringing style by the monks. And sometimes visiting ringers come to ring a full peal here or whatever.
Can you tell us about the church service that you have, and also, another area too is visitors who can stay, retreat, and then we can get into tours if people want to take a look around.
All right. Well, first of all, St. Benedict wrote the rule for monasteries in the 6th century. He lived from 480 to about 547. And in his setting out of the rule for monasteries, he also included the chapter on guests, because he knew that there would be people who would like to come to the monastery to spend a few days of retreat, would like to have the benefits of the spiritual influence of the monastery. So he wrote a whole chapter in his rule on guests and how they were to be received, and how they should be accommodated, and what provision should be made for them. And because of that, we have had a tradition now for 1,500 years of our existence of receiving guests into the monastery. And most monasteries, most Benedictine monasteries throughout the world have facilities for guests, some more, some less. So ours here is, we're sitting right now, is a guest house or guest department. And in our monastery here, guests come on weekends for retreats. These are prearranged groups. We also have people who come for a few days of quiet individually. And we have one of the fathers is appointed to be guest master, and he takes care of that. He receives them, arranges their stay, and sees that they're taken care of. They stay here, they eat here in the guest dining room. Men guests eat with the monks in our dining room, with us together. And they attend services in the church if they wish to, or in the case of some of the weekend group, they come from many different backgrounds. We have not only Catholic groups, but groups of many other Christian faiths, or of no faith at all, of the various kinds of retreats, Alcoholics Anonymous, or meditation groups, or whatever, or nurses, or things like that. And they will set up their own program of what they're going to do, and they bring their own retreat master if they wish someone to preach the talks, give them the talks. And so if they wish to come to our services, they're free to, or we also have a guest chapel which they can use for their purposes. So that is the guest, that's what you asked, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's the guest operation here, as it goes. And it's busy just about all the year. I mean, our weekend groups now are booked right through to the end of June. Sometimes some cancel, but for the most part, and we're booked from, we cease operations about during July and resume them again in mid-August. And that goes through to the following June, and there's always something going on just about every weekend.
So how many guests could you handle at one time?
Comfortably about 45. More than that, we have a small cottage which we can also use. And sometimes in very large groups, if it's some kind of a conference, and there are some people from, let's say, Mission or Abbotsford, then they remain at home and come here during the day for their talks or meetings, whatever they're having. Comfortably about 45. More than that is more difficult to do.
And what of tours of the seminary and the Abbey?
Okay. First of all, I remember Abbot Eugene, you might say indoctrinating, brainwashing, impressing upon us his aversion to the word tours. Because the reason is that when we first came here in 1954, between 1954 and 1982, when the church was built, we didn't have a church. We had a chapel upstairs, which is now our dining room. So, number one, the only access that people had to our services was to come through the monastery building, part of it. We didn't have the guest house then. So, they would come through part of the monastery to attend our services. And in connection with that, Abbot Eugene decided that it would be good if we allowed people to see something of our life, because it was a new phenomenon, in the middle of BC here. So we used to take people all through, I guess you'd have to say, yes, they were tours. We used to take people through various parts of the monastery building, because we have some artwork in some of the areas, our recreation room, the hallway upstairs, and various things like that. And we did this from 1954 until 1982, on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, and sometimes weekdays. And yes, I guess you could call them tours. There'd be groups or individuals who would do this. But what people did not realize was that we did this for the sake of acquainting them with our way of life. But this was not the norm. And it was a great hardship for us to sacrifice our privacy all those years. Yes, it's true, the monastic dormitory, as we call it, or residence building, that was off limits to guests. You were safe in there, as it were. But other times of the day, I as a monk would walk around certain parts of the building, there'd be guests all over the place. So it was not a situation, it was a situation we were very, very relieved to be done with, or to have done with. And in 1982, that was stopped. And I say this because sometimes people come now who had been here at that time or had visited when they were younger, whatever it was, and they say, well, there's a beautiful fresco painting up in that hallway which we saw, you see. And so I say, well, of course, yes, but you see, we don't take people there anymore. And then you get this little verbal duel goes on, because I said, well, it was such a wonderful thing, and my sister's here from Saskatoon, and it would have been so wonderful if I could have showed it to her, you see. And I say, I know, but, you see. And they'll say, I know, but, and it goes back and forth until I have to gently prod them into realizing that they were the lucky ones. I can't show them that anymore. So back to your question on tours, what we do now is that people come here to the entrance lobby. We have a model of the buildings there, and one of us explains the buildings and explains those facets of our life that go on at those buildings. And then we direct them to visit the Abbey Church, to look around and see what's there, or We also leave them free to, especially in good weather, to look around the grounds. We have a little walkway over to the cliff that looks over the Fraser Valley, and that's pretty well it. So in other words, it took me 5 minutes to answer that, but we don't have tours. We welcome visitors. We explain something of our life. We invite them to look around the grounds, and of course there is the guest house and retreats, and people say that's fine. But we do not give tours as such, and I would want to stress that because the reason I think Abbot Eugene didn't like it was very commercial. Mm-hmm. And you think you're running some kind of a museum, and guided tours, little signs up there, such and such a time. He just didn't like that idea, and I can understand why.
Okay. It kind of defeats the purpose of the monastery, doesn't it?
Well, I think we think it does,
yeah.
Because it becomes commercialized,
yeah.
And we're not on display here.
No. I'm surprised it went as long as it did.
Well, it's anything human. You just get used to it after a while, and for all those years, we never. It was, I wouldn't say annoying, but it was a factor that was less than pleasant. But you just, well, this is what we do. But when the time came for us to say, now, 1982, now we have a church, and you as visitors can come to the church. That's where you come. But we have to have our privacy. And I often tell them, and once I tell people this, and this is almost my clincher argument, when I tell people, I say it as gently as I can, I say, look, if you were in your home, and perhaps you had a very interesting home, how would you feel? I don't put it quite this way, but something words to this effect. How would you feel if you were sitting down in your living room on a Sunday afternoon and people started having guided tours through your living room? You feel, this is my home. And people don't come in here. This is my privacy. And once you tell them that, then they understand.